Wars are no longer fought only with bombs, soldiers, and burning cities shown on television. In the modern world, the most powerful wars happen quietly, far away from battlefields. There are no sirens, no invasions, and no official declarations of conflict. Yet millions of lives are slowly pushed toward collapse. This form of warfare does not destroy buildings. It destroys systems. Hospitals begin to run out of medicine without explanation. Supermarket shelves empty, not because of shortages, but because payments are blocked. Currencies collapse even though nothing physically changed overnight. Governments are blamed, while the real mechanism remains invisible. The suffering looks accidental, disorganized, and self-inflicted. But behind the chaos is a carefully designed financial weapon, a weapon enforced through banks, trade routes, and global payment systems. It is powerful enough to bring oil-rich nations to their knees. It is quiet enough that most people never notice it happening. This weapon does not require approval from the public. It does not need soldiers willing to die. It only requires control over money, trade, and access. And once deployed, it is almost impossible to escape. Entire countries can be destroyed without a single missile fired. This is the war of sanctions, and Venezuela is only one of its victims. Sanctions are presented as a moral response to bad behavior. They are sold as tools to punish governments, not people. But sanctions do not fall from the sky. They are engineered. Every sanction begins with a legal document, not a weapon. A signature in Washington can freeze billions overnight. Banks receive quiet instructions about who they can no longer touch. Insurance companies stop covering shipments without explanation. Shipping firms quietly cancel routes to avoid risk. Payments begin to fail, one transaction at a time. Imports slow down before anyone notices. Spare parts stop arriving for power plants and refineries. Maintenance is delayed, then abandoned. Infrastructure begins to decay from the inside. None of this looks like war. There are no explosions to blame, only technical difficulties and compliance issues. By the time people feel the impact, the system is already broken. Leaders are accused of incompetence. Citizens are told their suffering is necessary. The machine keeps moving, silently. Venezuela did not collapse because it lacked resources. It collapsed because it had too many. Beneath its soil lies the largest proven oil reserves on Earth. Oil that does not need permission to exist. Oil that does not obey political alignment. For decades, Venezuela's oil funded social programs and independence. That independence became a problem, especially when leaders began rejecting outside control, when contracts were rewritten, when foreign influence was reduced, when the dollar's dominance was questioned. That is when the pressure began. Not immediately, but gradually. Financial isolation came before economic collapse. Credit dried up before shortages appeared. Sanctions followed long before headlines. The target was not the president. The target was the system. And systems collapse slowly, until one day they don't function at all. Sanctions are often described as targeted, but targets are rarely the ones who suffer first. Political elites adapt quickly. They find alternate channels, private networks, and protection. Ordinary people do not have those options. Doctors cannot bypass blocked payments. Patients cannot reroute medicine shipments. Farmers cannot ensure exports without approval. Businesses fail not because of mismanagement, but isolation. Inflation rises as confidence collapses. Savings lose value faster than wages can adjust. Black markets emerge to replace broken supply chains. Corruption thrives where legality collapses. The economy fractures into survival mode. Meanwhile, headlines blame socialism or corruption. Rarely do they mention financial strangulation. Rarely do they explain blocked trade. The suffering is framed as self-inflicted, the weapon remains invisible, and the narrative is controlled. The most powerful weapon in modern history is not a missile. It is the US dollar. Global trade runs through dollar-based systems. Oil is priced in dollars. Debt is issued in dollars. Reserves are held in dollars. Access to dollars means access to the world. Losing access means isolation. Sanctions exploit this dependency. A country does not need to be invaded. It only needs to be disconnected. Swift access can be restricted. Correspondent banks can be cut off. Transactions become radioactive. Even neutral countries hesitate to engage. Fear spreads faster than policy. Compliance becomes survival. Venezuela learned this the hard way. So did Iran. So did many before them. Once sanctions take effect, the story begins to change. Media narratives simplify complex systems. Collapse is blamed on leadership alone. Economic warfare is rarely mentioned. Charts are shown without context. Inflation becomes a punchline. Starvation becomes a statistic. Migration becomes a talking point. The public is shown symptoms, not causes. Sanctions are framed as justified. Suffering is framed as necessary. Resistance is framed as stubbornness. Alternatives are framed as dangerous. History is rewritten in real time. Viewers are taught what to think, not what to question. The deeper mechanics stay hidden. The machine avoids scrutiny. Accountability dissolves. The cycle continues. Once sanctions are imposed, reversing them is rare. Compliance does not guarantee relief. Policy demands shift constantly. Conditions are added. Trust is never restored. Investors do not return easily. Infrastructure cannot rebuild overnight. Skilled labor leaves and never comes back. Brain drain becomes permanent. Currency confidence takes decades to recover. Every year under sanctions compounds damage. Children grow up in scarcity. Entire generations adapt to survival. Normality becomes a memory. Even if sanctions end, scars remain. Venezuela is still living this reality, long after the headlines faded, long after outrage moved on. The damage continues silently. That is the true cost. Venezuela is not an exception. It is an example. Iraq experienced it before invasion. Iran lives under it today. Libya felt it before collapse. Russia is now testing its limits. The pattern repeats. First isolation, then pressure, then instability, then justification. Sanctions soften the target, economically, psychologically, politically. Resistance weakens over time, not because people agree, but because survival takes priority. This is strategic exhaustion, and it works. Sanctions are framed as ethical tools, as alternatives to violence, as humane solutions. But hunger is not humane. Medical shortages are not peaceful. Economic collapse is not moral. Sanctions shift suffering downward, away from decision-makers, towards civilians, children, elderly, workers, those with no influence. The moral high ground is maintained rhetorically, not practically. Violence is outsourced to systems. Pain is delayed, not avoided. Responsibility is blurred. Guilt is diluted, and silence follows. This story is not just about Venezuela. It is about power, about control, about how modern empires operate. Sanctions normalize economic warfare. They set precedents. They redefine acceptable suffering. What happens abroad shapes what happens at home. Systems built to punish others can be repurposed. Financial control does not disappear. It expands. Crisis justifies new tools. Emergencies justify more authority. History shows this clearly. The same mechanisms repeat. Only the targets change. Only the narrative adapts. The machine remains. Waiting, watching. Sanctions are becoming more common, not less. Technology makes enforcement easier. Digital currencies increase traceability. Financial surveillance expands quietly. Compliance becomes automated. Resistance becomes harder. Alternative systems are being built, but they are fragile, fragmented, politically risky. The world is splitting financially, into blocks, into alliances, into guarded networks. Trust is dissolving. Globalization is reversing. Sanctions accelerate this fracture. Stability decreases, tension rises, and uncertainty grows. The most dangerous collapses are invisible at first. They begin in spreadsheets, in banking terminals, in compliance departments. By the time streets protest, it is too late. Systems do not collapse loudly. They fail silently, one transaction at a time. Venezuela's collapse looked sudden, but it was engineered over years, layer by layer, restriction by restriction, pressure without accountability. That is the true danger. No single moment to resist, no single enemy to confront. Only consequences, spreading slowly, quietly, inevitably. Every weapon has beneficiaries. Sanctions are no different. Financial institutions gain leverage. Energy markets realign. Competitors are weakened. Assets are devalued. Opportunities emerge from collapse: cheap labor, cheap resources, strategic access. Crises create openings. Order is reshaped. Influence shifts. Power consolidates. Suffering is externalized. Profits remain internal. This is not accidental. It is systemic. It is predictable. And it is profitable. Sanctioned nations are told they have choices: comply or suffer, reform or starve, submit or collapse. These are not real choices. They are ultimatums, framed as diplomacy. Negotiations happen under pressure. Consent is coerced. Sovereignty becomes conditional. Independence becomes expensive. Neutrality becomes impossible. Every decision is constrained. Every outcome is shaped. The illusion of agency remains. The reality is control. This is modern empire. Without borders, without flags, without accountability. Sanctions do not always achieve stated goals. Governments rarely collapse because of them. Instead, societies harden. Authoritarian control often increases. Black markets strengthen. Militarization accelerates. Isolation breeds resentment. Trust disappears. Long-term damage outweighs short-term gains. Yet sanctions persist because they serve other purposes. They send signals. They enforce hierarchy. They demonstrate power. Failure is rarely admitted. Adjustment replaces accountability. The machine adapts, not reflects, not apologizes. It continues. Every sanction sets a precedent. What is justified today becomes normal tomorrow. What is targeted today becomes generalized later. Exceptional measures become standard tools. Financial warfare becomes routine. Boundaries shift quietly. Oversight weakens. Power concentrates. Resistance shrinks. Citizens accept more control because it happens elsewhere first, because it seems distant, because it feels justified. History warns us about this pattern. Empires always expand tools inward, eventually, inevitably. Sanctions are not external forever. Systems never stay limited, they evolve. Venezuela still exists, but it is not the same country it was. Infrastructure remains damaged, trust remains broken. Millions have left. Those who stayed adapted. Survival replaced progress, stability replaced ambition. Sanctions did not bring democracy, they brought endurance. They reshaped society permanently. Recovery is slow, painful, incomplete. The story is rarely revisited. Lessons are rarely discussed. Accountability is absent. The weapon moves on. To the next target. The cycle repeats. Empires do not rely on force alone. They rely on systems, on dependence, on leverage. Sanctions maintain hierarchy without occupation. They discipline without invasion. They punish without visibility. They control without consent. This is efficient power, scalable power, quiet power. It avoids backlash. It avoids resistance. It avoids responsibility. Venezuela revealed this mechanism at great cost. Others are watching. Others are adapting. Others are preparing. The world is changing. Sanctions raise an uncomfortable question. Who decides who deserves to suffer? Who defines acceptable pain? Who is held accountable when systems collapse? There are no trials, no reparations, no apologies. Only policy updates, only new justifications, only moving targets. The victims remain statistics. The architects remain anonymous. The weapon remains normalized. Silence becomes consent. Distance becomes denial. This is how power hides. Behind complexity, behind legality, behind morality, until questioned. Sanctions are not temporary tools, they are structural weapons. Once normalized, they expand. Once accepted, they spread. Venezuela was not the end. It was a demonstration of what modern power looks like, of how collapse is engineered, of how suffering is outsourced. The next target may not look like Venezuela. It may not be oil-rich. It may not be foreign. But the mechanism will be the same. Financial isolation, systemic pressure, controlled narratives, invisible war. History does not repeat. It refines. And now you know how this weapon works. Thanks for watching. Do subscribe and comment.